right?
Until 11, including questions.
Okay, so we'll dive right in. Not many people around can pre-train. I'm afraid to ask how many of you have pre-trained the model, but usually I ask, and
Soon all of us.
yeah, and this is why I don't ask, but then I ask people to raise their hands, and maybe one or two raise the hands. If we also ask if it's a large language model, then maybe it's no one, unless in very specific groups. But if I would ask if you have fine-tuned the model or adapted the model in any way, efficient fine-tuning, prompt, and so on, most of you and most of everyone that are in the field did something like that. So the vision that goes throughout all of this talk is, could we take those small adaptations and somehow get them together to collaboratively pre-train? Could we improve pre-training in a step-by-step manner instead of getting one model out, sharing it as a static model, and then just analyzing it until a next static model is released? So before I get into details, don't be bored. I'm here for you. I can skip the 4 papers, supposedly, but I cannot read all of it, and it's okay. We can talk on whatever interests you. Okay, so the overview of those 4 papers follow this line. There's pre-training, which is the common paradigm. You pre-train, you fine-tune over it. That's easy. Now, the first paper asks, okay, I can, instead of using a pre-trained as my initialization, use any other model. In Hugging Face, there are tons of models. Maybe one of them is better than Roberta. That's it. So the first question is that. The second says, okay, maybe we found that Dila 999 is better than Roberta base. Nice. But could I use 2 models? In Hugging Face, there's 1,000 models, not just one to pick from. Could we take several and make them into one model or one set of weights that is better to start from? Then there's a side note of why did it even work, whatever we found that works there. And the last thing we're going to talk about is doing it again and again. Because if we already found that there is any way to choose, given an architecture, a model that is better than the pre-trained model, then why not now use that as our new pre-trained model? And when people adapt it and fine-tune it, we can use their adaptations and then set that as the new state of the art and keep on improving the model by steps. So that's the last thing. And I skipped all of the visualizations again.
Oh.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Why do we even pre-train? Or why do we use the pre-trained model? Because it's better than random. We have some given architecture, and we can initialize it by any point in the vast space. And instead of that, someone gives us a point and says, this is a better point. Start from that. Okay, nice. But also, it's not a new finding that it's not always the best point to start from. Obviously, the point you ended with is a better one. You don't know that one. But even taking a fine-tuned model is sometimes better. And it wasn't clear when or why. So the setting we start from is, instead of taking the pre-trained model, we take a model that was trained on some source task. We might or might not control which task is that. And we also have our own target task that we care about, the one we fine-tune our initialization on. Sentiment analysis, topic classification, whatever you come from home with. Enough with introductions, we can get into science. So, an experiment. We take a lot of models from Hugging Face. I think here is 66. And each and every one of them, we fine-tune on a set of data sets. So we take them and we fine-tune each of them again and again. Or we fine-tune it once on another on that and another, and not again and again the same one, just separately. And we test whether it's better or worse than the pretrained model. Green would be better. And we did it many, many, many times and got those results. So what do we see in general? The first thing I would say we see is that it's not a very green table. In general, it's not a smart thing to just go out there and pick a model from Hugging Face instead of Roberta. You are probably better off with Roberta 5 out of 6 times when you just pick a model. But we also see some trends. So we see columns that behave differently, which means that there are data sets which care more about initializations than others, or ones that the initialization could benefit, that you can benefit more with from better initialization. That's about the data sets, but you might not be, you probably do not pick your data set, but you are picking the model. So what about the rows? I would say that it's also clear that there are green rows at the bottom, sorted by average. And what do green rows mean to us? It means that that there are models which outperform the pretrained model in many data sets. So it's not something about a shared space or something like weak label data that I would touch in a second. It's not that some models just have those sporadic green points. Some models help some data sets and other help other data sets. We see that there are rows that are just good. So it's not something about the shared skills that were learned between 2 data sets, but something that just makes those models better. In a sense, you would probably not choose Roberta large when you have Roberta extra large ever, unless it's efficiency or something like that. So in the same sense, it learned something general and useful. We might not know what, but something. So it brings us back to the question.
Do you take into account like randomness of the fine tuning? So like
it varies a lot. I don't remember if this specific graph is with 5 seeds, but in the paper we have things with random seeds and STD, and we control for that. And we see that the differences are much more than 2 STDs. So we see that as significant. We also have a site that we would touch on at the end, and there we check thousands of models, and you see that there the best models are far away better than the pretrain.
And something else, you talked in the beginning about that you don't want to pre-train again, but here it sounds like you're talking about fine-tuning.
So what I said is that the vision is that at some point we would be able to keep on pre-training without someone giving us, here is a new model.
Okay.
And this is kind of the first step that says, if I can replace the pre-trained with a better model that just came by someone using their own expertise, then we can do it again and again. Or hopefully we might be able to keep on gaining by different researchers coming with their own agendas and their own research lines, each one giving us a bit of a better model. So this is the one step that says, is there even a better model?
But you assume that everyone has the same pre-trained model.
We assume for all of this talk that the architecture doesn't change, only the weights. And in the last slide, in the future is let's change the architecture and not only the weights, but this is where we started. So I was talking about weak label data, which means there is a probable assumption that says, why would fine-tuning on one data help fine-tuning on another data? A reason for that to help would be just because it's more or less the same data. I trained on QNLI, now I train again on MNLI, maybe I just saw more examples of whatever I care about, which we also started from, but it seems that this is not a strong effect. And how could we see it? In the paper, we have significance testing and regression and more sophisticated things, but here let's go to the visuals. Like the table before, this is the same data sets in rows and models in rows and data sets in columns. But now we created those models by using the same data sets. And what we have in the black line separate similar data sets and non-similar. For example, the middle ones are all NLI data sets. So we expect that in the diagonal, we'll find green squares because we fine-tune in the 2 times on similar data sets. I would say that you don't see it. Significance testing and stuff would also say that, averages. And in the non-diagonal, we see that what happens when we train on non-similar data sets. And the general trend we see is something like that. It's true that if you want to pick a model randomly or pick a model that is similar to your data, you get better results by picking a similar model. But this is it's a significant but very small effect. A much stronger effect would be to just pick a good model, if you knew what model is that. So if I would tell you this is a good model, it would be a good model even if it was trained on MNLI and you care about sentiment analysis. So the point is finding those good models and not finding which data affinity, what affinities do that train source data and target data has, or something like that.
Question.
Yep.
Did you also compare it, for example, to a model that is, because now you first train on one data set and then on the other, or fine-tune, did you compare it on a model that is like fine-tuned with data shuffled, with two data sets shuffled at the same time?
Shuffle as in the same data set, just different order of...
No, both.
Multitask learning.
Yeah, exactly, together at the same
So
time.
multitask learning is a good thing. In the slide before, the bottom row is a multitask learner, and it's good. It's Muppet, if you know it. So multitask learning is consistently a good thing to do. And also our last work that tries to do many iterations is kind of doing multitask learning in iterations, right? If you each time get data from a different source, then hopefully you slowly incorporate a lot of data. So multitask is, or even meta-learning is the goal, and the way to get to meta-learning is by multitasking in a smart way or something like that. So it's not here, but it's better. But the assumption is that multitasking you might have, but you would never have multitasking on all of the data sets in the world. You might be able to get a lot of models on all of the data sets in the world, because what makes something a data set is that someone used it as such. And they might share or might not, but they might share the model.
Wait, why can't you have multitask on? Isn't it like what's happening with D5 and GPT-3?
No, but they are trying. GPT-3 just is not even in supervised manner, most of it. Maybe in some of the editions.
Is...
Yeah. So yeah, people try to get more and more supervised data, but currently it's very manual effort of someone creating the model. And when you have a centralized process, your advantage is by taking a lot of data at once that is all similar. Your advantage is not by being able to get very diverse data sets and getting a lot of different things into it. For example, if you can't use scale in a sense, right? Scale is based on you making a small effort that could keep on being again and again used in the same way. And on dataset, you need people with expertise that would tell you, here is a worthful knowledge, and I scraped it, and I would tell you that this is the label, and this is something that doesn't just happen. So getting all of those data sets is not achievable. Yeah, it's true that you can get to, you can, for example, create a shared resource like Hugging Face, where people create something that is in a more digestible manner, and then you can scale on it. But to create it, you needed a lot of people to make it. You might make scaling easier, but you can't just come and train on everything at once. Okay, so we said that it's not replayable data, and you just, the main thing you need to do is pick the best model. So the problem here is that you probably, when you come with a task, you don't want to go on all of Hugging Face and look for the best model. So two things that we gave you. One is that we have some efficient way of doing it in a two steps solution. We have it in the paper if you care. But an easier thing to do is if they are just good models and not models that are good for you, then you only need to find it once, which model is good and which isn't. And for that, you can ask me. So we created a website, and we continually download models from Hugging Face, find out which architecture do they have, and fine-tune them on 36 data sets. And we have everything online telling you, first of all, on each data set, what score each model had. So if you have some assumptions of something that is more interesting than what we found or something like that, there's thousands of data points out there to check. And you can also just pick the best ones because they're there. And maybe for your task, the best one is not the best, but it's probably one of the first best. So take 5 and check them instead of checking, I think, 1,000 Robertas or something like that we checked. So it's there and it's counting, and if you have anything about it, you can contact me. Questions before I go to the next step? Cool. So the next step is fusing 2 models into one. Now, instead of starting from 1 model, I want to start from 2 models. But I don't want ensembling where I now have to run 2 models. I want to actually get weights for 1 model. And the solution for that came by 3 groups in parallel. We are one of them. You might know Model Soups or Colin Ruffle and Michael Matena that came with their own, each one with a bit of a different angle for why did they care about it. But basically the idea is take 2 models and think about each model as a large vector. And if a model is just a vector of weights, then we can look on the average of vectors of weights, and we might find something that is useful. It would not be the average of the functions, because this is a nonlinear function, and by definition, it won't be an average, but it might still be meaningful if various assumptions hold, and the next thing we're going to talk might give some intuition on why does it work.
And here, just to clarify, for each parameter, you average the 2 values from 2 different
right. Or the n values if you use several models. Yeah. You just average everything. And there have been different trials, and currently there isn't a better method, but there surely will be at some point. Okay. So experiments. On the diagonal, we see just models as before. If we fine-tune an intertrained model, a model that we just picked from Hugging Face, then we would get this, the numbers mean how better we are than Roberta on 36 data sets in average over 5 seeds, those kind of stuff. But basically, positive means that this model is better than Roberta. Not them. We already saw that. Not surprising. The interesting thing we find is that all of the rest is, instead of taking one model, we take 2 models, fuse them as we said, and then test it as the initialization for the 36 datasets. And how do we read this table? If we have green or yellow in the cell, it means that it's basically better than the fine-tuned model. If it's red and black, it's worse. And I think you would agree that mostly you should just take 2 models and fuse them, because you would get better than just one of the models.
The results here on what are the numbers?
The numbers are the average, the gain, when you the difference from the pretrained over 36 data sets that we tried to make as diverse as we could, and 5 seeds.
Okay.
So rows and columns, like one model was trained on QQP and one on MNLI, and you fuse them.
Right.
And it's symmetrical, which makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just an average of the weights.
And do you have any insight of like what works with what?
If you take the best model as a single model, it's good to use that. Not too surprising. But other than that, we don't know enough. We didn't find yet a very clear trend.
So like, I don't know, like looking at it, MLI is really good with FSD. Both are pretty large, maybe the largest here. Data sets. Maybe it.
Yeah, they're also good initialization points in general.
Yeah, so maybe this has something to do with it.
So the size of the data that they were trained on, this is more related to the last experiment. When we find that there are good data sets and bad data sets, and when you take on the same data sets more examples, when you train on more examples, you get stronger effects. So bad data sets would give you stronger bad effects. So it's not just a big model, it's a big data. You want a good type of data, and then if you have a lot of examples of this good type, then you keep on gaining, probably until some point, but we never reach that. And the trend doesn't seem that we almost reach it, so we can scale that more. Yeah, so you find the large ones, because those are probably have large impact because they're both good data sets and large, not only one of them.
Does architecture matter for this? Like, do you have the same results for
We have it on T5, something similar. It's and I think that too. So it's similar, but not exactly the same, in the sense that it's not always the same data sets that help each model. But the trend is the same.
Interesting.
So the next thing that I would ask would be, could we do it with 3? Could we scale it and do it with all of Hugging Face? So we can, and it's much better than the pretrain model, and we slowly get more and more robust, in the sense that here you have minuses and pluses, and you have those variability, and also seeds have variability. And when you get more averaging more, then you slowly decrease all of the variability. But, and that would be the next slide, let's take, for example, that we take the best model, and now the diagonal would be the best model fused with one other model, and the rest would be fused with 2 other models. So here it was MNLI in this experiment, and it's not better anymore. So it's better than the pretrained model. Don't mistake that. That's a confusing point. The numbers are all positive. We don't see any negative anymore. So it's very robustly better than the pretrained model, but it's not better than the fusing of two models. So in those cases, fusing two models is better than fusing it with a third. So you can't scale by keep on adding models in that way. You might scale by choosing the best two, but that's limited in a sense. So we will reach in the last slide our current idea of how could we still use more and more data. But before that, I think most people, when I tell them that I try this averaging thing and those kind of stuff, they usually look at me something like that. And it's like, you just did something with those nonlinear functions and you assume that the linear combination of them would mean anything. Why did you even try this bizarre thing, and why does it work? So there are various ways to think about it. You can think about Reptile. I had various reasons to try. But in hindsight, what I would focus now on would be the space. Think about each model as a point in space. And I already hinted at it so far. A model is a vector of 1 billion parameters, whatever. So it lives in a 1 billion parameter space. Then in this space, I can pick any point, and it's just a valid model. It might be a very bad one, but that's, for example, what random initialization does. You just pick some model. And we know that a pretrain is 1 point, and we ask what are all of the other points and how do they behave. So very, very intuitively, and it's really wrong, but it gives us the feeling and the way to think about it. This very multi-dimensional space looks in 2 dimensions, something like that. And I drew it, yeah? It's not right, it's just illustration. So we have the pretrain and it's somewhere. Somewhere around. Around it, you can find all of the models that you trained. They reach somewhere in this space, they have to. They are more or less in the same distance from the pretrain, so it's not just arbitrary places, but they are also not in a sphere around the pretrained model. They don't cover everywhere that is in a certain norm distance from the pretrain. They have a certain region where they all fall into. In this quite large region, you can find smaller regions which correspond to full areas in which all of the data set, all of the models trained on data sets of the same task fall into. And for me, I think that's maybe the most surprising thing that we find. You can train on several NLIs, and they would all fall similarly in the weights. I just take this huge vector, and it's similar to other vectors. And it's also, you can go to a fine-grained analysis and look on each data set. You can also see models trained on the same data set. They would fall in a subspace of a sub-region of the task region. So they are all also separable in those terms. So, okay, that was the intuition. How do we see those things? The first thing is, let's do it easy. Take data sets. We trained 20 seeds on a bunch of data sets. And here is the 2-dimensional TSNE. It already looks quite nice, but TSNE is not our, it's just visualization. The colors that we see here are each point here has 2 colors, one of the cluster and one of the ground truth. Whenever we see a point with two colors, which should be popping to your eye, like there below with the with a color mismatch, in those points, these are the places where the clustering do not fit the ground truth. So we can see that the clustering is really well separating all of the data sets really well. And by separate, the clustering is based on cosine. So basically it means that if you look on the angles in this huge space, you can tell which models are close to each other and which not. So nothing fancy correlations and those kind of stuff. It's really in the space as it is.
Question.
Yeah.
If I got you correctly earlier, when you and I asked whether we should use model train on similar task versus picking the best one, your answer was, yeah, that helps, but a little bit. But now you're using similarity between tasks as a way to analyze this. How do you square the two?
Yeah. Okay. So there are two things. One of them that we don't think we don't care currently about zero shot. In everything that I talked about, we talked about initialization. So the meta learning, the place from which you learn fastest, doesn't have to be the place where you end up in the right place, but it can be just a hill or something like that. It could be a place that learns the hard skill that you need to learn, and then it's easy to specialize from there to something else, even though it's currently not in the right space. And that's okay. Also, when you have a lot of models and they are the same area, they're all in the same area in some sense, but they could be in a also right. They might be a central point which is very good, and all of the areas of all of the tasks are surrounding it, and then it's easy to get from there to other places. You can, with those large dimensional things, it could make sense. But indeed, basically what you're asking is about the optimal, and most of this asks not about the optimal, but about the regions, about areas in which all of it is good. And it's the whole region might be good for some task, but there are in the same region there are still points that are better than others, and maybe you're finding those kind of points.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
Other questions? It's a non-intuitive thing. It's okay. Okay, so if I convinced you with the data set, then the next thing would be data set is nice, but maybe more intuitive. What happens when we take different data sets, but separate them to tasks? We take topic classification, sentiment analysis, and NLI data sets. And we do basically the same, but now cluster into 3 instead of 2, however data sets we have. And TSNE is not bad, but is not as good as before. But you can see now the colors that, again, the clusters works very well. There are 2 data sets. You can also see the separation to data sets still. There are 2 data sets which the cluster says these are not topic classification, but sentiment analysis. I don't know why, but other than that, it's separating it very well. And notice that in a sense, this is even harder than separating paraphrase generation and question answering or something. Those are all, the labels are all quite restricted, but still, given a set of weights, I can tell you on which task was it trained on, without knowing what data set you've seen, how many examples you've seen somewhere in the appendix, and those kind of stuff. So all of this area is meaningful in some way, which all of it is nice, but we just sampled some points and we tell you that this is a region. maybe it's just separated points. So the first thing to remember is that those points are not just there, they are the outcome of SGD. So we went in various ways and we somehow found those points. So those points are not just there, those are to some extent local minima of something or approximation of a minima that SGD found on different data sets, but it's a local minima on one data set is still close to another. So that's interesting, I would say. But what we really care about is something that is more like meta-learning or multitask or something like that. And we generalize the loss and ask on this same model, could we take the loss of all of the NLI data sets? Is it good on all of the NLIs? And or on all of the on all of the general data sets, because we said that even general data sets are not like just general points in the same direction. So do you see that this region is good in that manner, and on a data set is just the baselines that we expect? And we want to ask that not only on the points that we've found, because that would be some kind of a generalization and people do that, but also on the region. So the first question would be, let's slice the region. And now we go through the region and ask whether the insides of the region behave as we would expect. They would all be in some way good on a general domain or something like that. And note about the intuitions, the middle of such a slice is exactly the averaging that we talked about. This is 1 point in the analysis we're doing. And we find something like that. So those are 3 graphs because of the 3 granularities, but we see that all of those graphs are curved. So the sides are real models, and they are good, not always as good as another model, but they're somewhat good. And the middle is always better than the sides. So when you go into the region, you are always, in our places, probably you can find counterexamples, but in general, you are better off than on the edges that you started on. So it is a region that, in some sense, the middle of it is really good for NLI tasks, or even for just tasks in the general thing, more than just the models that you find. And a side note about the weights and stuff, the middle is not always the best point. So we picked just a point in a vast space where everything that we would have picked was good. So we tried one and it worked for us. And in a sense, it's not surprising. We didn't find the optimum, but we find anything in a very vast space and it works better. Which of course asks how to optimize inside the space. And we have something initial, but we are far from finding the right way to do that.
And the loss here is what exactly?
It's the average loss over several data sets.
Oh,
So
over other data sets.
yeah, so in NLI, it might be QNLI, WNLI, I don't remember exactly. In general, it's all of the data sets that are diverse, and in a data set, it's just the same one.
Yeah.
If you really care, then you can also see per data set in the appendix of the paper.
And the 2 models you start with, they're not random. They're like your best 2 on NLI. How do you pick the 2 models?
We used all of them. So we have 5 seeds or something like that. So we picked all of the pairs of the seeds. So this is how we get the diversity, the shades. Mm-hmm. In the NLI, there is a shade. It's just covered by the point, something about the losses there being close. Okay, but they might be or might be not, something special about those slices that we took. Maybe it's not the whole region. Just when you go between two models, you find something interesting, but the region is not that good. So we checked that. We just now randomly sampled points in this vast space. It's a convex hull of many models. There's a way to sample uniformly on a convex hull. We just pick points, and on each point we calculate the loss. So the graphs here are a bit hard to interpret. It's not as nice lines as before, but instead we get histograms. So how do we read that? Some terms from the paper, so don't mind the legend. Green would be the samples that we just did, and having them on the left means that they have low loss, which is what we want. Orange would be the fine-tuned models, and blue would be other fine-tuned models as a baseline. For example, if we took NLI datasets, so green would be points between those NLIs, orange would be the NLI models that we have, and blue would be sentiment analysis and topic classification and various models that are not NLI. So first of all, we do see that models from the same, between the orange and the blue, we see that the orange is in general better than the blue. So models on one have low loss on different tasks. Not too surprising, but still the areas here play a role. I think maybe more interesting is that the green is very clearly better. So even though now we are not in a line between anything, we're just picking randomly from this vast space, we get good models for this generalization purpose.
Could you say that this is like a similar effect of, I don't know, checkpointing, averaging, or those other techniques to increase robustness with models?
So I would say that usually when you think about the checkpoint averaging, you average on the same data set.
Mm-hmm.
So what you do is something that is more similar to what you think about WSA and SAM and those optimizers. They look in the region of the data set, the smallest region, and instead of getting to the edges of this region, they kind of make sure that you fall in the middle or somewhere in the middle.
Right.
But it's still on the data set, one data set only point of view. Yeah, okay. So that gave us some intuitions, and now we are back to the problem that we had before. This is all nice, but all of this talks about taking one model or one point and not about how could we keep on improving the pretrained model. How could each one come with their own expertise and contribute to everyone and get better and better models collaboratively. So the last thing is just to suggest to do it again and again. We found that we can't take more and more models at once. But if we take several models and we see that it gives consistent improvement, we can get this consistent improvement, say this is our new pretrained model, and we can fine-tune on it and fuse those, and then get a new model, fine-tune on it, fuse it, get a new model, and do that again and again. Which slowly grows to the multitask learning that was proposed here. Could that somehow perform multitask learning without ever having one person with all of the data at hand? And bottom lines first, it does exactly that. So in the top right graph, you can see in dashed the pretrained model. You can see the iterations in blue. So you can see that when more and more data comes, the results improve. And you can also see what we thought is going to be the upper bound. And you can see that it's not an upper bound. So the green and yellows are the multitask learning. Green would be exactly multitask learning on our tasks, and yellow would be even multitask learning on more tasks and caring about hyperparameters and stuff, because that is Muppet. That's a paper where someone actually tried to beat the state of the art by multitask learning, and we didn't. We just thought that it's a nice method and we would show that it's useful. And for some reason, we got even better than that. And there are some intuitions, but we didn't have the intuitions before. So that's nice. We see that we get a nice generalization and it's better. You can also see that it really learns. It's not only something about reducing variance or something like that. In the bottom left, you see something that is like zero shot. It's with Roberta, so we train the classification head, but only that. And we see that with time, it knows more. The representation could classify better all of the models it learned, even though we never learned and stop there. We learn and then we fuse those models. So even though we're doing this noisy action, we still slowly incorporate our knowledge into the models. So that's that. And in few shot on unseen tasks, it gains even larger gains than on fine-tuned. Okay, because the few shot is harder, you can see gains there more easily. That's the method, and it works maybe too well. So someone adversarial like me would say something must be off. I don't know, maybe the wrong half of the glass is empty. Something is bizarre here. So let's analyze a bit and see, could we probe it and where would it fail? It might not generalize. No time for all the details, so just look on the top two lines. Blue one would be on seen tasks and tasks that we had during the training, and yellow one would be exactly the same ones, the same task, but that they were not seen. We did the cross-validation, so each time we can do the same things. And you can see that it's almost the same. You might even say that the unseen is better than the seen, which in almost any other learning case is very weird. The test should not be as good as the train. We should overfit the train. But here is a bit of a weird situation, which is not really surprising that the test behaves that way, because we see the test at some point. We fine-tune on those data sets at some point. So the only question is whether we fine-tuned on them only at the end, or did we fine-tune them during those iterations and also tested at the end? So whatever data we have for a data set is seen when we fine-tune. So the question is, could seeing the same data before help us when we see it again or not? And in that case, I would not be surprised that training on the same data twice is not very helpful. Training on another data and then training on my data, this is something that helps. And because of that, we see that the gains are quite consistent, because probably just if we had 30 data sets, so one of them did not contribute anything, and that's ours, and the others did something. So it seemed to generalize well, and that's optimistic. We can also say it's we see gains on average, but it's just because we broke something and something flew through the roof, but the average is a lie. So it seems that it works on most data sets. Some data sets are not. I don't know if it's specific data set or not. Interesting. And of course, the data set which it helps a bit and others that it helps a lot. I wouldn't expect it to be a fully like the same graph on everything. That would be too optimistic. Another thing is that maybe it doesn't scale. Maybe when I would get more and more data, it would just stop incorporating the data because it's noisy and it is this weird thing. So we didn't reach that. In this graph, we just add data iteratively, and we see that with more data, it gets better. So we tried all kinds of things, but at least with the amount of data that we have now, and we are trying to scale it as the next step, then we didn't reach the point where another contribution of more data is not helpful. So when people come on with more and more data, it seems to help. And the last thing might be that we have this separation of the data to different contributors, people giving us the data. So if we separate it to more and more, would we be able to get more data sets? Before we said that when we fuse several models, it's not better than fusing 2 models. Here, if we have more and more contributors, would we be still able to use whatever data they give us? So it seems that we have, and they converge to the same place, but taking the same data and splitting it to more contributors, so getting the same amount of data, but by many different bodies contributing, does slow the process. So I need to get all more data or the same data several times in order to process it well, if I separate the same data to more people.
Just a sanity check, we have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, it's almost the last slide. So in a sense, more contributions is okay. We converge to the same thing, but this is the trade-off. The main trade-off that we do find is that when you have more splits of the same data or more contributions, then convergence takes longer. So you can train for more time before reaching this convergence. We don't have to converge. As long as we keep on going up, it's okay, but still, the best part.
And for this, you're splitting the same data, so each iteration is
Yeah, so
shorter?
this is like an analysis in the paper. So there we instead of taking a lot of data sets which have a lot of noise of the specific data set, we took a large data set and we split it to different parts. So we can see 50,000 at once, or we can see 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, or those kinds.
So like if you were put on the x-axis, the number of sample scenes total, things with more contributors would just shift to the left.
Things with more contribute if
if you normalize by number of sample scenes in total.
So here in each iteration we made them see the same number of examples exactly. Just each contributor would contribute less data. So if I have 50,000, let's say, so I can give you one contributor giving you all of the 50,000 by training on them at once, or 5 contributors each seeing 10,000 of them.
Got it.
And then we ask whether this distribution costs us something, and it costs by taking more time.
Makes sense.
More questions before I go to the last slides? Okay, so we had a lot to take in. We started by saying that there are various models out there that are better than the pre-trained model. They are already out there. You can go and pick them up. You can go to a site or do whatever else you think is the right way to pick them. You can also find several of them and fuse them into one and maybe get even better results than just picking one of them. We a bit discussed on how the space looks and why, some intuitions on why would that help. And the last thing that we showed is that if we keep on doing it as a community or something like that, we didn't reach the end. We can keep on improving and create something that is like a multitask learning, but without anyone doing a multitask learning, each one just caring about whatever they cared about. And the last thing is what we are going to do, and not we've done so far. So I want to keep on looking for ways to harness expertise, to find ways where model editing, various other things where people can come and say, I know something about the model or about the world. Could I somehow make it into the model? And to keep on accumulating and recycling models that are already there. And also, I think someone asked at the beginning, also change architectures, because all of this assume that you know what architecture you want, but maybe the expertise is that you know that we need GALU and not ReLU. We want to incorporate this possibility. Yeah, that's it for me.
We had a lot of questions during the talk, so we still have 1 more minute, so someone has a question.
How do you square this fact that fusing 3 doesn't seem to work well with this complex whole task region intuition? Because I feel like based on that intuition, I would expect fusing multiple on the outside of that region or something to work reasonably well.
Yeah, so in that sense, it basically means that the centroid is not the best point in this region. Because we do see that when you fuse 3, it's much better than the pretrained. That's robustly, because you're somewhere in this region, it makes sense. But in this region, I didn't have, or I still don't have, a claim on in this region where exactly, in which sub-region you need to find the best option. So apparently, the centroid, which is taking more and more models and getting 1 point, is not the best. Maybe somewhere on the line you get better than somewhere on the not line. I even have, let's see if I can pick it. We even tried taking, so we tried to take 3 points and move in between 3, averaging 3. And we see that the best average of 3 is indeed not the average, but there is a point that is better than any point of the sides. So there is some weight combination of 3 that gives you much better model than any 2 combination could give you. And it's also continuous in a sense. So around this area, it's all better than around.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so we're out of time. So
Yeah, we're happy to take questions offline if you want.